The recording has started. That was quick. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Welcome to Change Committee. Particular welcome to David Lockhart, who is the new John MacDonald in SDMP. Welcome, David. I wondered whether you wanted to say just a few words about yourself to introduce yourself to the committee.
Good morning, Chair and all committee members. Thank you very much for your welcome. As my name's David Lockhart, obviously. Been in the role of head of function for some 15 months now. The role that I've transferred from as the head of service delivery in the east of Scotland. Very interested to see the progress that the service delivery model programme has been making over the last few years, and in particular some of the engagements that we've had more locally with the team. So I'm very interested in how this continues on as a programme, and obviously it lands upon my shoulders as the executive lead to make sure that it does progress as expected. I have a fantastic team around about me who have really pushed this on over the last few months, and we're seeing the rewards of that. I hope that you'll be assured and content with the level of information that we provide to you going forward, and also available at any point in time to answer any questions that you may have. So thank you very much, and looking forward to working alongside yourselves in the future. So thank you for that.
No, thanks, David, and we're very much looking forward to working with you. Been some awesome stuff done in SDMP, and not to put any pressure on, but John MacDonald's shoes are probably quite hard to follow, but I'm sure you'll do a grand job. So thanks for that. Apologies for absence, Ali. I think I'm right in saying we haven't got any. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah, no formal apologies.
Okay. Consideration of and decision on any items to be taken in private. Anybody got anything they feel we should be taking in private? No? Good, thank you. And agenda item 4, declaration of interests. Any declaration of interests? Nope. Thanking you. Okay, that takes us on to the minutes of the previous meeting, and I shall just go through them page by page as usual. And if you can come up with any comments or corrections as we go, that would be great. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, 7.
Chair,
8.
if I may.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Sorry, I didn't unable to unmute. I think it was page 5, just in terms of John MacDonald. He was a Deputy Assistant Chief Officer, just for accuracy, not an area commander.
All right, okay. Yep, noted. We'll make that change. Thank you. Okay, so no other comments? No, thank you. We shall take those minutes as accurate recording of the last meeting. Thank you. Action log, Ali.
Thank you, Chair. So just referring to page 11 of your pack and page 104, within the summary, you'll see that we've got 4 actions in total, all of which have been marked as completed. So just to confirm that the committee are content with the position statement updates and for these to be removed accordingly. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Ali.
Chair, Nick Barr.
Yep.
Nick Barr, board member. I just wanted to congratulate the team on the comprehensive response to the first action 856. I just thought it was worthy of note. We'd identified that the original answer didn't quite address the action, and the comprehensive response was excellent, I thought. Thank you.
No, thanks, Nick. And thanks to the portfolio office. Andy's giving you a thumbs up. Good, thank you. Moving on then, SMB action log. Just a reminder, as always, this is here for information only. And as you can see, there is only one action, which I don't expect anybody has any wish to explore. Nope, good, thank you. Right, moving on then to agenda item 8. So the project dashboard. Gillian.
Thank you, Chair. So you'll have your cover report there, which summarises some of the key issues on the dashboard, which I'm not going to go through because I presume that you've read and happy to take any questions, but I'll just summarise what the dashboard is saying. So we have the 3 projects within the SDMP programme, all showing green and for time, cost and quality, and skills and resource are red, and David will be here to answer any questions if anybody's got any questions round about that. The people, payroll and finance project within the PT Fast programme is showing yellow for time and amber, sorry, for time and amber for skills and resource, and green for cost and quality. And as you requested at the last meeting, Paul McGovern has done a written update on which is further on in the agenda, so you can deal with that, and probably any questions that you have may be addressed in that report. There is also a project brief for the people, payroll and finance project, because that's now a project within its own right, so it's coming just for the governance process. The rostering project is all green and amber for skills and resource. Again, Paul will be here to answer any questions should you have them round about that. The RVDS improvement programme is amber for time and green for cost, quality, skills and resource. And we have a change request and an updated dossier for that. And David Farris will be here to answer any questions should there be any round about that. CCF is amber throughout, and as you know, we'll be discussing CCF later on in the private meeting, and again Gary I'm sure will be able to answer any questions that you may have round about that. Emergency services network, we are green for time, red for cost, amber for quality and green for skills and resource, and Paul Stewart will be able to answer any questions should there be any round about that. McDonald Road is green for time, green for cost, amber for quality and skills and resource. And Ian Morris will be here should there be any questions round about that, or he may want to provide an update on that. The West Asset Resource Centre is green for everything, but we also have a change request, which again Ian can talk to if there's any specifics round about that. Safe and Wells, all green, and I'm not sure that there's anybody here to answer any questions, but I'm sure that Ross may be able to deal with them, or we can pass them on for answering if need be. But happy to take any questions about anything general in regards to the dashboard.
Thanks, Gillian. Stuart?
Yeah, thanks, Gillian. I'll make my question specific to rostering, but it's really a general question. On the rostering, there's a cross against the project briefs, etc. And it applies to a number of the projects. So how do we get comfortable on our raggings when we've got outstanding project briefs and risk registers, etc.?
Who would like to answer that? Andy?
Yeah, I'll come in that, Chair, if that's okay, Stuart. Yep. So yeah, it's a perfectly legitimate question. On rostering specifically, as it's a new tranche of work under the broader PT Fast programme, what Paul is doing at the moment is going through and identifying what those work streams are going to be. So what we now have to do is go back retrospectively and develop what the brief and what the dossier is going to be for those particular projects. There have been projects that have been added into the change portfolio historically that have probably not went through that logical sequence of brief, dossier and then into a delivery plan. That I've been challenging the team on. How do we retrospectively go back and do that? Is there a need to go back and do that? So you've picked up on the same aspects of the dashboard as I have done, Stuart. And just to give you some assurance around that, again, that these are questions that I'm asking internally, and how that business change lifecycle might address some of that. going forward.
Are you confident, Andy, that the ragging is appropriate?
The ragging in terms of the green for time, cost, quality, skills and resource?
Yes.
Yeah, confident in as much as it's still early days in terms of the rostering. They're still going through framing what the scope of that is going to look like. So I think, you know, detail will emerge over time, Stuart. So I you know.
Sorry, I wasn't so much wanting to home in on a specific project. I was just making a more generic comment around if the project briefs and the dossiers and the risk registers are not there, how confident can we be on the ragging? And it's maybe my misunderstanding of a process that maybe a project brief is just needing updated or whatever, but I'm just trying to understand, and are we, yeah, can we rely on the raggings as maybe a more succinct way of asking the question?
Yeah, I think it's evident that there's still a lot of definition to be done for that particular project, and it's something that the ragging will have to be updated to be more reflective of what the project's current status will be once we understand more and once more detail emerges through that. So it's maybe something for us to discuss internally whether or not ragging is appropriate at this stage.
Yeah, I think Ross, you want in, and then I'll come in on the back if you want to go, Ross.
Yeah, it was just to pick up on the point. I put my hand up before Andy made that very last point. This is a very new project. Previously, there was the PT Fast programme, and it's now been disaggregated into 2 projects, and further projects may follow. So it's simply because of its newness that documentation hasn't been produced, and it's possibly worth, because of its newness, because we really don't have anything tangible to measure the time, cost, quality, skills and resources against, it might just be that that's left blank in future. I think that's the best estimate. I certainly don't, to give Stuart as much reassurances as possible, I certainly don't think, while it might not be 100% accurate, given the early stages of the project, I certainly don't think there's anything that we're carrying a great deal of concern or risk around.
Yeah. There's a couple more people wanting in. Nick, and then Angelina and Stuart, you want back in. So if we go with Nick. Who's having trouble with his mute button.
Ah, there we go. Now, next trouble, lowering my hand. Okay, good. Thank you. Just look, I don't normally do this, Gillian, but could I just ask, and we probably don't need to have much of a discussion about this. On your covering brief at 341, capacity to deliver, I sort of read it and I read the one sentence and winced a little bit. It basically says the need for full stakeholder engagement in projects will be detrimental to the capacity to deliver projects. I just think, it's just a public document, and could we just round that off a little bit to say that we're fully engaged with engaging, if you know what I mean. We're fully on board with engaging. It's just, it's not necessarily detrimental. That was all. That was a small point. And my other point was just about the People Training Finance and Asset Systems program. I was just a bit really concerned about the ambers around time and skills and resource. Although it says the project start date was June 19, it seems to me as though it's a fairly young project, and already we're an amber on there. And I just wondered if there was any comment that anybody would like to make about that. And again, similar comments to Stuart about the project dossier, etc. Does anybody have any thoughts on that, please?
Paul McGovern's giving us a full update on PT Fast further on in the agenda, which hopefully I'm sure he can address that. You've gone on mute again, Nick.
Sorry, Chair. For two things. One going on mute, and secondly bringing that up before the actual thing.
That's
so,
okay.
Yes,
You can ask. You're happy to. So noted, slight change of words in 3.4.1. And some questions for Paul in terms of PT Fast RAG status. Can I just jump back to Stuart's original question and Ross and Andy's response? It feels to me like a blank until we have some basis for RAG status would be sensible. So if there isn't a brief in a dossier, then what are we basing our RAG on, which Stuart, is that kind of where you were coming from?
Yes, my question wasn't, I was using rostering as an example. My question is really on all projects. If we have an outstanding risk register or dossier, how are we being comfortable with the ragging?
Yeah. Okay, Andy's nodding, Ross is nodding, happy with that? Good. Angelina, you had your hand up, but it's gone down. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, yes, very briefly, and strangely, it's also on 3.341, the capacity to deliver, not though picking up the nuance that Nick helpfully has around an unintended message. It's frankly, although I'm sure I have read this elsewhere before, in reading it for this meeting, I realized I didn't know how to interpret it. In other words, is this a general statement that because we do things in a consultative way, they take longer? Or is it a more material flagging that we anticipate delays against stated timetables because of the need? And I guess the reason I was sort of stumbling over my interpretation this time, I wasn't sure if we were meant to tie it into the thing flagged at 311 around we've had to re-advertise our public involvement and consult. So is this are we flagging capacity in a more meaningful way here? Or is it that more general statement of method?
Okay, Paul and then Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Angelina, I think it's a bit of both. And I think if I'm being fairly candid with the committee, I don't think at all times we fully build in the consultation process and the length of time that is involved in a consultation process into all of the projects. There's a really good example around the building of the strategic timeline that board members will be aware of on the service delivery model programme, whereby our initial timeline extended significantly once we built in all of the anticipated requirements of a consultation process of that particular nature. So there is a bit around that, but there is also a piece around the resourcing and capacity to deliver in terms of the the step maturity level that we're at in terms of a portfolio office and the process that we're going through around resourcing and bringing resourcing into the portfolio office. I'll cover a little bit more about this in the risk spotlight, Chair, just around the resourcing and capacity and the communication with stakeholders piece that will maybe give a wee bit more insight into it. But really good question, Angelina, and in short, the answer I think is a bit of both.
Okay.
Very helpful, thank you.
Thank you. Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. Just a couple of points which I think are under the dashboard as opposed to individual projects. And one, that there's a lot in the dashboard and the commentary around about individual projects in relation to shortfalls on resources and skills. And it just got me to thinking about your assessment at the organisational level, about the organisational capacity to deal with the cumulative and all of this. And I'm not saying you haven't done it. I'm sure you have done it, but it would be helpful just to sort of hear a little bit about what are your thoughts on that. And the second point was really just a specific point on the emergency services network, and just to understand the risk of Scottish Government not coming up with the money. So just those 2 points, please.
Thanks, Brian. Who would like to pick them up? Andy?
Chair, if I may just come in on the resource capacity response for Brian. So capacity management is just another fundamental factor that needs to be considered as part of the overall management around the portfolio. So to try and give the committee some assurance, I've already initiated some conversations internally with Jason Sharp, who heads up the workforce planning aspect. Of course, I'm looking at how we do that more specifically around the delivery of change, but it's to share some early thoughts and concepts with Jason around how we might be able to introduce some of that into the organisation. I think that as well, Brian, comes as part of that front end process and procedure before anything even gets into the portfolio. You know, we talk a lot about the investment side of it, the cost and the benefit aspect of it, but if we don't have the capacity to deliver, then we're not going to realise the value from it. So these are all intertwined with one another. So to provide assurance, I just want the committee to know that it is conversations going on, it is in the mix of things. And again, as I've committed to before, when there's an appropriate time to maybe spotlight a topic like capacity for a more in-depth conversation, I'm happy to take that on board with the committee. So hopefully that responds to that particular question, Brian.
Thanks, Andy. Paul?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just on the ESN question, Brian, in terms of the funding for the Scottish Government, we are engaged at all levels in terms of the Government, both at a Scottish level and a UK level, in terms of the funding arrangements for the network in relation to the Emergency Services Mobile Communication Platform. So I am content, and the SLT are content, that we are both capturing all the costs that are associated with that project, and we are communicating them regularly into Scottish Government and to programme level. Like many projects that have gone before this one that sit at that type of level, there is an element of engagement required around the funding. In terms of risk, I don't see it as a huge risk. We will either get the funding or we will not, in real layman's terms, and if we don't get it, there's a risk that we will overspend, but we will know exactly why we have overspent, and we can be able to associate all costs to that. So it's not something, to use our previous line, it's not something that keeps me awake at night.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul.
If I may just come back in,
Sure.
Fiona, thanks, Andy, for that response. Really great to hear that it's a prior question in that process, and really assured that discipline is being applied or will be applied more broadly. So that's excellent. And Paul, I think the organisation and the staff in it have got a fabulous track record for getting the money. So it's not that I was concerned, but that's really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks all. Just before we go into the next part of the agenda, just a reminder to introduce yourself just for the recording, so that it's clear who's speaking at each point. Okay, so moving on then to RVDS change request and dossier, etc. And I hope we have David Farries on the line.
Yes, Chair, I'm here.
Hi, David.
Hi
Welcome.
there. Thank you. I'm having a little bit of issues with my Teams. It seems to be stuttering. I don't know if anybody else is encountering the same challenges this morning, so please bear with me if it's not the case across the board. I have prepared a bit of an update and change request in the updated dossier, just in the interest of your time, Chair. And for the committee, do you want me to run through an update in line with the papers, or you just want to? Of course, the papers have been out for review.
Yeah, you are stuttering slightly, but assume, and I'm sure correctly, that everybody's read the papers. So just the key points, David, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, so the last change request that came to committee was in February 21, and that was at the point when RVDS strategy SDMP, and there was a change of executive lead to myself from the SDMP programme. When there was a change of structures internally to manage and support the project, and this included the creation of the National Retained and Volunteer Leadership Forum, and then the formation of the RVDS dedicated support team. At that stage, the RVDS strategy project was seeking to explore what was the 19 considerations that were identified through the Phase 1 SDMP report. As we worked through those, it became clear that it would be advantageous to revisit the scope and the intent of the programme, whilst also considering challenges that were faced with an aim of identifying quick and also systemic improvements. We set about working with the NRVLF to reconsider the project, and this led to the refresh that you see in front of you today. We have applied a markedly different and in light of that, you will note that we have a change in nomenclature from RVDS strategy to RVDS improvement programme. And on the 15th of September, the SMB approved the new dossier that you have today. The dossier themes around about our RVDS model. Those are contractual, attraction, recruitment, competence, retention, and policy. And in line with those 6 key themes, under section 2.12 of the dossier, you'll see that we've identified 5 key work streams. These are individual projects that have been created and cross-cut across the themes. So those are variable contract options, establishments, creating between all duty systems, responding options and solutions, and recruitment improvements. And there's a great amount of detail and the SMART objectives in the appendix to the dossier that you see from page 36 of your pack. We've also, in the intervening period, introduced an RVDS board chaired by the Director of Service Delivery, and we are continuing to work very closely with colleagues in the portfolio office who have been extremely supportive, and we are also pioneering, along with the programme office, a way of better capturing a benefits realisation for projects, and we're about to embark on some of that work shortly. So that's just a whistle of where we are in addition to and change request, and quite happy.
Sorry, David. Ali was using his power and put me on mute. You were stuttering a wee bit, but I think I certainly got the gist of that. Any questions from the committee? No. One thing I just wanted to comment on was the approach of doing the outcome aim statement, and then the detail behind that in terms of the baseline measures, activities, etc. That I thought was really, really good, very, very clear, and certainly from my perspective, really makes you think about what the project's trying to do in each of these key areas. So I really like that personally, and thank you very much for working with Andy and the portfolio office and introducing that. Andy, you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to David as well for indicating the partnership in terms of how we might develop benefits going forward. The team and I had identified the reframing of this programme as a perfect opportunity to at the front end understand how we might identify benefits, identify the measures for that, and take that through the life cycle of tracking those benefits, and help us develop a process and a tool that we can then look to scale out across the rest of the change portfolio, and for subsequently new initiatives that come into the portfolio going forward. So I know benefits was a topic of interest for the change committee, so it was just to give you some assurances around that. Thank you.
No, that's great. That's great. Thanks, Andy. Ross.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to underscore, because David broke up a couple of times, and I just wanted to underscore something just regarding the governance of this piece of work. As the committee will be aware, it was previously the RVDS strategy, as was called, project, was part of SDMP, and we took the decision some time ago to remove it from SDMP and put it into the operations function within the Service Delivery Directorate because of the work that they were doing anyway round about RVDS. And initially it was governed under the group that David leads, which is the National Retained and Volunteer Leadership Forum, which is an excellent forum, but we didn't feel that that was the right forum to govern the programme of work to improve the RVDS. So that forum is going to continue and will absolutely be a support to the work that's being undertaken. But above that, we've created a programme board, which is going to be chaired by ACO Stuart Stevens, to govern the programme of work, supported by the NRVALF, which will continue to be chaired by David because it's doing some fantastic work, but we just felt we needed to make that distinction between governance of the programme of work and ongoing work round about the RVDS improvement stuff. So I know that David did cover that. I've fortunately heard this from David through SMB and in other meetings that I've discussed it with David, but I just wanted to underscore that because David had broken up a wee bit and just explained the different routes for governance for this. So thanks, Chair.
No, that's really helpful, Ross. Thank you. Any other questions for David? No, thank you very much. And moving on to protection of vulnerable groups scheme. So we've got Scott Semple talking to this.
Thanks, Chair. Colleagues, the closing report itself, I guess, offers a summary of the project and just highlighting, and amongst other things, how it's tracked against budget and also some of the challenges we've faced, whether it be the volume of processing and capacity to do that, or the small matter of a pandemic. Hopefully the committee, through the report, have picked up the collaboration and cross-directorate working that took place within SFRS to deliver the project, and also the close working relationship we had with Disclosure Scotland, obviously to respond at various times to some of those challenges. I think at this time it would be remiss if I didn't recognise the work and support of Marion Lang and her team towards the end of the project to help it get over the line, and that was very much appreciated on our part. You'll see the report captures some of the learning from the project that we will most certainly take forward into future projects of a similar nature. Also referencing there that we have a small number of cases still to process, 37 in total, and obviously just to give the committee some comfort there that those will now be consumed within the business as usual work of the pod directorate, and they'll be covered off in due course. I was wondering whether or not the committee would be curious to know how we handled some cases that actually flagged up some convictions, and just offer the committee some comfort in the sense that it was very much how we would do it normally as part of, say, a recruitment process where the HR team and the line manager would consider each case on its own individual merits, whether or not we already knew about it, as has and could be the case, and if we didn't know about it, consider how serious the conviction was and whether or not it required any further investigation. So that, yes, that happened, but we had a process in place that handled that. And I know from the comments and reporting into People Committee, there was some interest in terms of how we handled that process too. So with that, Chair, I'll take the report as being read and invite any questions from the committee on the closing report. Thanks.
Thanks, Scott. Nick, remember to introduce yourself.
Hello, Nick Barr, board member. Thank you, Chair. Just trying to manage my screen here. Right, here we go. Thank you, Scott. Thanks for that. I've got a couple of points. Good to see it's the case for all new recruits now to go through the PVG scheme. That's excellent. I'll just finish these couple of questions, and they're very simple, top-level stuff. Was there any correlating evidence to suggest there was a common cause for the delay in the 37? Are there any thoughts around that? The 37 still to submit applications. Having been burnt, my fingers being burnt previously around the Care Quality Commission and this sort of stuff, you can bet your bottom dollar that if there is an issue, we will find that, sorry, I'm talking about the inaccuracies of reporting that are identified in the lessons learned. Are we quite assured that we have eradicated those inaccuracies? Because I have, as I said, personal experience of you can bet your bottom dollar if an issue does occur, it'll be on one of the things that have been inaccurately recorded. So I just seeking some assurance that we've got that accurate recording now. And I'll just end with a very positive note that says I thought the lessons identified were well written and food for thought. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Maybe come in just in your second point there about the accurate recording and say, yes, we're much more confident now in that regard. And the first point you had in relation to the 37, I think the report outlines there's some of it's to do with absence, and then it's almost kind of half and half, and there's a small number that we need to chase up. What I would acknowledge as well, Nick, is in the latter stages of the project, there was a huge effort to engage with staff and make sure we could get that processing through in terms of the numbers. So yeah, there isn't so much a trend emerging other than absence and people not being available to do it, but with the other small number, we're certainly still in the process of chasing that up and getting that through, but no trend as such.
Yeah, and I presume then, just sorry, a follow on from that is there's no detrimental impact then on the potential service delivery around this because of those 37.
I don't think so. I'd maybe defer to my service delivery colleagues in that, but I think because of the number, in terms of the size of it being so small, maybe different if we were significantly higher numbers, but I don't think so as a result of the numbers, but happy to defer to service delivery colleagues if there's
it's just a point. Just a point. Are they all up in the northwest of Scotland? Are they all, in one state? It was just about that, really. Just a food for thought. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Scott. Any other questions for Scott? Nope. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving on then to West Asset Resource Centre change request, and we've got Ian Morris to talk to this one.
Good morning, committee members. Ian Morris, Acting Director of Asset Management. The change request you see in front of you for the West Arc is to ask for an extension of time till we get cost certainty over the build cost of this going forward. As we've learned the lessons from previous projects, we want to make sure that we've got what we class as a stage 4 cost certainty from McLaughlin and Harvey, the primary contractor. We have done several elements of this. The designs have been agreed and signed off by all stakeholders. We have novated the design team over to McLaughlin and Harvey's after we've had agreement of the design function, and we've asked them for cost certainty in this current climate as much as they can do going forward. And we do realise there is still an element of risk there with regards to some of the challenges that they've got, and we're expecting that final costings to come in on the 29th of this month, at which point then we will then convene and see the affordability of the overall project. Now, there's two elements to this. The extension we're asking for is one, for that as we said there, the cost certainty, and two is a strategic decision by ourselves to try and spread the cost over 2 fiscal years to take some of the pain off the capital plan next year as well. So it allows us that flexibility to use what we spoke about at the Board Development Day to talk about the cash flow movement during dealing with a capital plan that we've got to do on an annual basis. I'm happy to take any comments or any questions regarding this, and the paper is before you for your consideration.
Thanks, Ian. Just a side question, I suppose. Is there any sign of stability in terms of material costs, etc., or are they still mad?
It's still mad out there, as you say. No, there's no sign of it levelling off at the moment. We've had some indication of the cost of certain packages within the West Arc, and some of them are within what we thought the thresholds would be. We've had one or two that we've pushed back on that have come back and seem exceedingly high. We've questioned them as well, and the again, exactly what you're saying. We realise there's a spike at the moment because demand is going through the roof. But
Yeah.
if we're talking about building this then next year, is there a potential for that demand and supply to come back in? So we're asking the questions and putting them back to ask for the verification and clarification and the evidence.
Yeah.
The cost is there as well.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Brian.
Yeah, thank you. Correcting my earlier tardiness, Brian Baverstock, board member, and I feel I must jump to the defence of Nick. He did, in fact, announce who he was, so I must take the blame for that. So, duly done. Ian, thanks very much for that. Can I just absolutely clarify? I understand the desire for cost certainty. But I think what you said is that you're still to establish what that final cost of cost certainty is going to be. So when I was looking at the paper and looking at the financial implications, I wasn't sure it reflected that situation. I'm grateful if you could just clarify, and if you can give any sense of where you think that might go. Presumably north is the answer. And just to also ask a little bit about the other potential internal costs, whether it be prolonged project costs or perhaps delays in securing efficiencies that you might have built into the original business plan. Just any comment that you can make around about that would be helpful.
Okay, no worries at all. First of all, I'll answer the one, the internal costs about the project team. The projects is business as usual as part of the property, so there's no dedicated team being set up for this to do this. It's part of the property's business as usual. So they're working, the team, and I'm not looking for sympathy here, but the team are working on several projects at the same time. So it's just about the scale of movement on this. The business requirement with this, if you remember, was the final, oh sorry, Brian, you won't remember, this was the final element of the strategic intent document that was submitted in 2014, and this is about moving obviously the West Arc to here in Cambuslang. With the proviso, there's another project looking at starting to look at the replacement of the Cowcaddens fire station on the site at the Cheapside site at the back, which would then realise a significant capital receipt from that area to reinvest into frontline stations going forward. So that kind of overall strategy is still in plan, and at the moment the indicative cost of land within Glasgow city centre and Edinburgh and any major city is going through the roof at the moment. So the longer it's delayed, the higher the capital receipts. But the knock on the side of that is the higher cost for building as well. So there is a quid pro quo between the projects going forward. So the cost at the moment, we'd obviously came to the board and set this out early in 2020 has been 10.5 million. And that's what we're still looking to try and hold to. We have had several value engineering meetings with regards to the design, the specification going forward. Hence the reason I was quite clear in saying we have agreed a standards design, we've agreed a standard qualitative design and that's going right down to the size of the rooms, the foundations, the ramps, the various bits it's going to be. But what we've now done is novated that design team over to McLaughlin and Harvey for them to then look to see if they can do any redesignings but still meet the design which has been signed off by both parties. So they're looking at various options there to see whether there's different construction methodologies that they can do to lower cost but provide the same quality and the same function. So that's the sort of down and dirty area we're at the moment. We're getting some of the packages coming back, like the foundation costs and the various others. And foundation cost was one of the ones that we felt was exceedingly high because of the cost of concrete at the moment going through the roof. And we've challenged that and saying, well, if you're not breaking ground in this until the middle of next year, surely that cost and that demand and supplier will have hopefully evaporated or at least reduced. So we're asking them to come back. The difference with this is we're trying to transfer the risks onto them. They're equally a bit uncomfortable because of the buoyancy of the marketplace and the industry at the moment with regards to costs. So what we've said is by the 29, come as a cost. There will be a parameter within that. What it will be, I don't know. I honestly don't know. It will be north. Let's cut to the chase. It will be north than what it is at the moment. How far north it is, I do not know. And that's then the question needs to come back in when I sit down with the SLT members and yourselves to see about affordability of the overall project. And that's to save us signing a delivery agreement at the moment, which which then ties us in, is a bit what we've done with one of the other projects, as you know about, is tied us in with that. So it's a different way of doing that and trying to make sure that we're getting the cost certainty. I don't know if I've answered all your questions. I think
no, that's it. That's excellent, Ian. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ian. And thanks, Brian. Any other questions for Ian on West Ark? No, very helpful as always, Ian. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have People, Payroll and Finance, the project brief, and then followed by PT FAS, both with Paul McGovern. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so just Chair, just to get a bit of guidance, how you would like me to, would you like me to talk you through the paper, or would you just like me to open up for questions directly?
I would go with the latter. Everybody will have read the papers, so if there are any sort of key points you'd like to pick out, then absolutely fine, and open for questions.
I would maybe just pick up on one key point, and it ties back to what I meant the previous update I gave back in August, that the programme board, and you might remember, was talking about trying to find specific examples of where processes might change, and I was trying to kind of just make it real for people. So over the last few months, we've found quite a few examples, but I thought it might be worth highlighting just one example in particular, because it certainly helped me kind of crystallise my thinking of how things could be better, and that was around our current levers process. So we've been speaking to various suppliers and various customers, and this one was flagged up as a really nice, discrete little area where we can kind of show how things could be better in the future. So we were speaking to West Midlands Fire about their process, and to give you just a bit of an overview of ours. Currently, if someone decides that they're going to leave SFRS, whether that's retirement or resignation, the first thing they do is go onto our iHub and download an Excel spreadsheet. That Excel spreadsheet asks them for 40 different pieces of information. Most of that we already have. Well, some of that I should say we already have. Some of it we should have, and some of it we don't have. Or it might be out of date. So we're asking folk for their names, their payroll reference number, their date of birth, information we do have. We're asking them for their address, information that we're finding is increasingly out of date because people aren't maintaining that through self-service. But then we're asking them for key information that we should know, like your length of service. So we're asking people to populate that information for us. So that's the first thing that people have to do. The only question we really need to ask them is, why are you leaving? Is it retirement? Is it resignation? Is it something else? So that then gets emailed off to the line manager to progress. On the back of that is an expectation that people then download an exit interview. And the first thing in that exit interview form is 15 questions that we've already asked on the last form. So as a result of that, the outcome is that in the last reporting quarter, 90% of leavers didn't complete that exit interview form. So whether there's trends or information that will potentially, and I'm not saying that folk aren't discussing things with the line manager on an ad hoc basis, but at a corporate level, at a formal level, we're potentially losing 90% of why people are leaving SFRS. And there might be some important trends that they want to be cognizant of. Once all that information is gathered, gets emailed into the admin teams, and then they've got manual process of checking leave entitlement. They send somewhere in the region of 11 different emails internally and externally to payroll, pension providers, central staffing to work out leave entitlement. There's a whole series of manual tasks that then go on in the background. There's SharePoint lists to make sure that people are replying in time. Pension providers have to reply within a certain amount of time. So there's all this stuff going on in the background to make sure that it happens. At West Midlands Fire, if somebody wants to leave, they log on to the HR system and click resign. All of that other stuff happens in the background, and I'm not saying that they'll still have some elements of manual processes. I'm sure their systems aren't perfect, but on the face of it, you think there's somewhere where we would like to be getting to. So in terms of the project brief and the business case and the benefits, etc., I think that's just a nice little discrete example of how things could be better in the future. So that's the only thing I would wanted to say in addition to the project brief.
I mean that just completely horrifying, but it brings it alive. Can I ask before I open it up, how did you identify that particular process? Because presumably there are loads like that, and how did you pick that one, and how will we address the others going forward?
We picked that one because when we were speaking to these other customers, we just asked them, could you give me an example of a really good little process that changed fundamentally? And that was the one that they mentioned it, and there was another I can't remember what another organisation mentioned the resignation process. So it just seemed like a really easy, and it's quite discreet.
Yeah.
So that was why we chose that one. I think the other thing that I wanted to say, sorry, and I should have said it as part of introduction to that process, that it sounds a quite cumbersome process, but people are very working hard to keep that going, and to an extent we've kind of tied one arm behind their back. So I think it's important to recognise that people are doing their best with the tools and systems that we've got in place just now, but we are not necessarily making the life easy for them.
Absolutely. No, that's very interesting. Any questions, comments for Paul on that piece? Nick?
Yeah, thank you. Paul, I have to say, at the end of that, I felt like shooting myself. It's
no, please don't. Then we'll have to start the resignation process.
No, yeah. What a fantastic example of how to simplify, or how potentially a complicated thing can be simplified. Paul, I don't know if you were on right at the early doors of the meeting. I raised a question slightly early, just really, and forgive me if I've missed this in the brief, Paul, please. There was in the portfolio office overview of the projects, could you just talk us through the amber around the time and the skills and the resource, please?
Yeah.
I just feel I'd like to hear it from you. Thank you.
So I think that probably reflects a degree of naivety or optimism bias when we were developing the initial timelines for the separate projects. The expectation of how long it would take us to develop a statement of requirements and a business case, where we're fairly optimistic. I think in addition to that, we did have a contract business analyst who was working with us who resigned at rather short notice, and that meant we did a bit of a rethink about how we were going to deliver those two key documents. And what we decided to do was to procure the services of a third party, Moore Insight, who have referenced in the update document. And so procuring them took a bit of time, but we're hoping that now that they are fully onboarded and they're engaging with stakeholders, that will help accelerate the delivery of those key documents. We're expecting now for mid-February for initial review, and to be available at the end of March to hand over to allow the procurement process to begin. I think the amber for resources probably reflects the time and availability of skills. So we're trying to do a combination of bringing in contract resource, but also fixed term resource. On the contract resources I've mentioned, you can lose them quite quickly, even though they do have the skills that you want. Another example, on the rostering project, we've been trying to recruit to the post of project manager so that we can get that on a much more formal basis. So the interviews for that will be concluding today, but that process itself is taking quite a while, and obviously we don't know necessarily if we'll be successful in making an appointment. So I think that hopefully that explains those amber statuses.
Yeah, no, thank you, Paul. And Chair, just could I just ask one follow-on question? Is the link, this is a slightly awkward question to answer in this forum, but is the link between you and Andy and the project office as strong as it could be? Is there more that we could, or you could do there, or you collectively? So I'm thinking of what you first said there about optimism bias and just being hopeful and things. I mean, obviously there's a fair degree of experience in both camps, and I just wonder whether or not there's some sort of shared learning that could perhaps go on there. I don't know.
Yeah, we are engaged with Andy and his team. Leanne's our programme officer, and we have a fortnightly catch up with Leanne, make sure that we're engaged. And I know that Andy's got a big task just in terms of developing those processes more corporately. And we're really keen to see what we can learn from the change management aspect that Andy's bringing. We're starting that, and one of the things that I put in the highlight report was the engagement with the pod and finance directorates, and it's about. And that's why I was at pains to signal that people are working hard and they're doing their best. So it's positioning the change, not in terms of you're all doing a terrible job. we recognise you're working hard, but things could still be better. So that's one area that I'm looking forward to working with Andy a lot closer on how we develop that change management approach.
Right, thank you.
Andy, is it on that particular point you want to come in before Stuart?
It is, Chair, if that's okay, just to respond to Nick and the rest of the committee as well, to try and provide a bit of assurance. So I've requested internally that I now participate on every major project and programme board, not to frighten anybody, but just to try and get a bit more insight into terms of how these projects and programmes are being managed, where we might have some challenges, where I can offer up some of that experience. There is a challenge with that in terms of my own time, in terms of being spread too thin. So I'm quite selective on that. But to give yourself some assurance, Nick, Paul and I have been having many conversations in the background about where I could inject myself as and when he feels he needs that support, as I'm off in the background working on other kind of capabilities and service development.
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Andy. And I wouldn't, obviously, that's exactly what I'd expect. So thanks. Great work.
Thank you. Stuart.
Hey, thanks, Fiona. Stuart Ballingall, board member. Hey, Paul, thanks for your update. Clearly, the overall programme's taking shape by now splitting into the various individual projects. I would be interested in the thought process behind the decision to relieve the people, payroll and finance as one separate project.
Okay, so the rationale behind that is the recognition of the fact that the people data is going to form the core of everything else that we do. So getting that right, first of all, is really important. So the people data feeds the rostering system, the people data feeds the training system, and vice versa. So we decided that we need to deal with that one first. But also the fact that 80% of our costs, or 80% plus, I'm sure somebody will keep me right on that, are people related. Then the synergy between those two different aspects is so acute that we really wanted to look at them together. There's still an outstanding question about whether we get a single HR finance system or disparate systems that are better integrated. But dealing with those two, first of all, made an awful lot of business sense. That's why we've gone with that approach.
Yeah, Paul, it says I would maybe encourage you to have a look at what's the art of the possible very quickly in terms of keeping those systems aligned, because they're probably quite different.
Yeah. Thanks. Brian? Oh, sorry. Ian, did you want to come back in on that particular point?
It was just to support Paul's comments there. The justification and the reasoning for moving the asset systems away from the rest of it was to make sure we're getting best in class. What we'd already seen as part of the marketing testing was there were systems out there that could do everything, but what you found out, it was a module, or it was a hybrid version that had been bolted onto the primary version, i.e. the payroll. So the decision was made to keep them split in these orders to make sure we get best in class.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Brian.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Paul. Your story around the levers process certainly paints a very compelling case for change. There's no doubt about that. So my question, and forgive me if I've maybe sort of not read this properly, but at 7.1 of the paper, it talks about a deliverable of the project will be a business case. Now, it feels a bit horse before cart, or the reverse of that, whatever that is. It seems odd that even in outline that there is no business case to front end this process, and maybe this is just a bit of the legacy and we're catching up with that, and maybe it's a question for as much Andy as it is for you. But I think it's a really good example, because there is no doubt when you talk about this, there is a compelling case for change. And we have been talking about this project for quite a wee while now. So it's not as if, we've not had a bit of time where we could have outlined something. So just really keen to get your thoughts, perhaps from you and Andy, on that.
Yep, I think certainly business cases have been produced in the past when it was its constituent projects, and we did do a piece of work back in April to develop a business case that was more focused really around the resource commitment that they'll need. So various business cases have been developed at various stages, but the programme board decided that we would develop this business case in line with the HM Treasury guidance, which when we speak to Scottish Government and we speak to people like the Scottish Government Digital Assurance Office who have done business cases using this methodology before, it's much bigger than our internal experience of business case development. So that there's the 5 components. Well, I can't remember all the 5 components, but I remember 3 of them are financial, economic and commercial, which sound very, very similar. But when you actually look at the detail of what they're asking for, we haven't done that before. So that's why it is taking a bit longer than I would like. You would obviously expect a business case here, statement of requirements here, procurement over here. So the business case is a bit too close to the statement of requirements, if I'm being honest. But it's in recognition of the amount of work it's going to take to actually deliver that business case, which is why we've brought this third party in to help accelerate that process.
Yeah. Can I maybe just come back in? I fully understand that, and I certainly support, that the comprehensiveness of the business case that's being developed in line with the Treasury guidance. I think as a public document, however, this probably sets a bit of a hair running because it suggests that there hasn't been that prior business case process gone through, and I think it's important just for that governance sequence of events that it doesn't read quite like that.
Okay.
Yeah. No, good point, Brian. Thank you. Ian?
Yeah, if I can just come back in there as well to support, but I actually sit on the board of this one going forward, and you're right, Brian, it needs to be aligned with what the decision-making process has been. The board felt that moving to the Green Book business case scenario, as we did with the strategic intent back in 2014, was the appropriate way to go to give us that reassurance and giving us that qualitative element on it, that if we do get a Scottish Government review of this, then we can actually demonstrate that the governance has been in control. But like you said, there has been previous business cases which I think we need to notify in here as we move down that track.
Yeah. Andy?
Thanks, Chair. It's just to come back in. I think Brian asked for some perspective from myself on the business case process. So without setting up the business change life cycle as the silver bullet that's going to resolve all ills, that's what it feels like. I'm kind of harping on about it at the moment, but I think there's 2 or 3 stages that we need to introduce into the organisation, Brian. And that is, when there's an idea or an initiative that's triggered from somewhere, is that we need to have that outline of a case for change. Now that can be light touch in terms of where that comes in the front end of the process, but that then has to progress on to more of an outline business case, which maybe then takes in more of an order of magnitude in terms of what we would anticipate in terms of cost and resource and time to be able to deliver it. And as that detail emerges over time, we should be working our way towards a full business case that the organisation is willing to invest in and move forward. Because what we do at the outset might be very different to what we uncover through more detailed planning of this, right? We might budget something for 2.5 million in terms of an ERP system, and it turns out to be 10. So that's the kind of 3 stages that I've framed in my mind, Brian, that I'd like to incorporate going forward.
That's very helpful. Thanks to all of you for that.
Thank you. I've got a couple of comments and one question. The first is, and I'm sure I've said this before, I really commend the change management approach to this piece, the engagement with the actual users. I mean, there's a line now, of course, there's a line in the 7.2. No, it's not. I've lost it now. Anyway, there's a line in the report about speaking to the frontline users of the processes, whether they be frontline firefighters, operational control, or whoever. There's also quite a lot of emphasis on end-to-end processes, which I hugely welcome, one thought, not for answering now, is just as we progress with this project, is how do we actually measure the benefit in inverted commas? So the levers process must take X number of hours. You know, what does a new process take, and what does that mean in terms of capacity? I'm sure you're thinking about all of those kind of things. The one question I did have, and I don't know if you can answer it, is to do with the out of scope on 4.3, where it talks about document scanning. And based on previous scars, I kind of looked at that and went, ooh, is that going to cause us a big problem? Can you say a wee bit more about that?
Yeah, so there's lots of paper documents that are still sitting in files in Hamilton and in various other locations. I think it's in recognition of what we can bite off is that if there's processes that are still using paper documents, potentially those legacy processes are going to have to stay to some extent. If there's new documents being created, then we're not suggesting that we'll keep printing things off and put them in paper records, but a process of actually creating an electronics record document management system is a massive task in its own right. So I think it's just in recognition of what we need to do, particularly given the deadlines with contracts, etc., when we need to potentially be off legacy systems if the procurement process indicates that we're going to have new systems. So I think it was just to potentially provoke that discussion a wee bit, and so the board were comfortable with it, that we can only do so much, but that I think I maybe indicated it sometimes. Yeah, I think of until such times the business identifies a client for another project. So it's just to be nod that I think that'll be coming sometime down the line.
Yeah, no, that's kind of what I guess my worry is it compromises what we're able to do, and it probably will, but we know that because it's out of scope, and I completely understand and support not to bite off. I mean, it's the PTFAS is a very big project, so no, that's helpful, but one to keep an eye on, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Now that was just people, payroll and finance.
Yeah.
Over to you again.
Okay, so just the overall update. I'll try not to repeat some of the things that we've already covered, but at the last committee, there was a request for a written update, so that has been provided. Obviously, we've talked about the brief. I think maybe just kind of focusing in on some areas around the analysis that's continuing. We've got somewhere in the region of 300 processes identified. But as I've signalled in the updated report, we're not going into the nth degree. We're only doing as much as we need to do to understand what we need for a new system and how that informs the statement of requirements. Another area that we're really starting to hone in on now is around the data. So a lot of the focus has been around statement of requirements and business case, and they are still the priorities. But we're starting to now pick up a wee bit of work around the data. So we've been speaking to folk about what would a data analyst do, trying to think about a data strategy, but only in as much as what the programme needs to do to go from A to B. So we're not looking at maybe slightly wider concepts around corporate data management or master data management, or some of the things that we've been looking at. That's also out of scope. What do we need to do in the programme to go from A to B is the key thing. The engagement's continuing. I've referenced the session we had with the pod finance and training directorates last month, which went down quite well. And again, making the point, this is the department's own project. They need to tell us what they want. External engagement's ongoing, and I've documented some of the key learnings from that. Rostering is also starting to pick up. I've already mentioned we're doing the recruitment for a project manager, so we can start to formalise that a bit more. We can develop the project brief, project plan, and get some of that governance put up. We're also looking to identify a project executive who can actually represent, be the strong voice of that rostering. I've got a vision for how that will be different in the future. So I'll maybe pause there because I'm maybe biting into the time for questions.
Thanks, Paul. Any questions for Paul? No, you've covered everything beautifully. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you.
We're 11:09, can I suggest we take a quick 5 minutes, even 6 minutes, so back at 11:15. Thank you. Welcome back, all. We managed to replenish your teacups or whatever. Next item on the agenda is the portfolio progress update. Andy, usual, just everybody's read the paper, so your key points you want to highlight, and then we'll invite questions. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, have an echo there. Yeah, hold on. Is that any better? That's better. That's what happens when you have your mobile device right next to your speaker. Future lesson. Andy Main, Head of Portfolio, just for everyone to know. So as you said, Chair, I'm presuming that everybody has read the paper. So the purpose of the update is to just provide some emphasis around some of the key activities that are currently underway within the portfolio function. The update is not intended to be reflective of the totality of the work. That will be captured on the Portfolio Office roadmap as we move forward. So what I wanted to do today is just draw out some of the key activities, a few of them, but of course happy to answer any questions that anybody has that I might not address. So more specifically, if I start with action 2, which is around the strategy awareness sessions. So just to cite the committee, that there is a continuous level of engagement going on across each of the functions and the management teams. And the reason for bringing that up for visibility, I just want to give a bit of kudos to the organisation and the level of engagement and positive support that I am seeing and experiencing. I think that's really important for this committee to be made aware of, because there is a real appetite for change and improvements in terms of how we deliver change, but also being mindful. I think Stuart's used the comments 1 or 2 times before about trying to boil the ocean, because everybody has their own perspective in terms of what it is that we should be focusing our efforts on. But I wanted to make the committee aware of that. Action number 5, which is in relation to the business change life cycle. Again, back to my earlier comment, this will be the silver bullet that solves all of our ills, no doubt. But the team and I conducted a workshop the week ending the 22nd of October. Please say that was very productive, and the output from that workshop was an outline of what the business change life cycle could look like for the organisation moving forward. So that was the purpose, but it really gave me an opportunity to work with the team face to face for the first time since coming into the organisation. And so there was a lot of discussion around concepts, around ways of working, around what that future operating model would look like. But ultimately, we got to what that outline may look like for us. So the next steps are for us to engage with some of the key functions that we see or anticipate will have a large part to play across all of the major change efforts, and seek their input and feedback to help us refine that design. So you may have picked up from the documentation that this is very much a phase 1. So I'm not trying to bite off the change life cycle in its entirety, because it's just too much to do. So phase 1 is very much going to be focused on that front end and on the definition around the portfolio. So that is, how do we intake new initiatives into the portfolio? How do we prioritise? How do we ensure that everything's got an appropriate business case and a benefits plan associated to it? And how do we then start to have conversations around capacity, etc., etc.? So with all of those capabilities come a set of sub-processes that then have to be defined, of course. So I think that's where we will focus our primary efforts. And once we get to a stage where we can start to apply that and embed that in the organisation, we'll then move on to a secondary phase, which will be very much focused around the delivery aspects of change. How can we be more consistent and repeatable in terms of that? And of course, you know, some of that work will happen just naturally and concurrently as well as we move along. So that's the business change life cycle. In terms of action number 6, which is in reference to portfolio office ongoing recruitment, I'm now pleased to say that we're in a position where the change committee can be pleased to understand that we have the Change Centre of Excellence manager role, who will start in the first week of January. So this was detailed in the report as a key risk factor, given the initial period of notice for that individual was 3 months. They've managed to negotiate that down to 2, but I do believe that this will be a real step forward for the function and be reflective of recruiting a level of experience and competency which will further elevate the capability of the existing team and help to start to drive forward some of these key initiatives from a roadmap perspective. So that role will take charge of that on a day-to-day basis. So I'm quite excited about that individual joining us. And then lastly, just to draw out actions number 7 and 8, which are in reference to portfolio level financial reporting and business case process assessment. So as most of the Change Committee are already aware, one of the very first observations was having visibility into the total cost, both at a project and programme level, but also subsequently at the portfolio level. So the core principle of portfolio management is about the delivery and the realisation of value, and we can't do that effectively if we don't have the necessary level of insight into the cost. So with that said, there's a lot of work going on internally at the moment with Marcus Jenks, who's in John Thompson's team, and that's been very productive. So we're making some good progress around how do we get insight into the total cost of our initiatives. And in addition to that, we're also looking at the business case process as it currently is today, and how we can look to make improvements with regards to that and go through that staged life cycle that I mentioned to Brian earlier on. How do we bring something in with a light touch, with an initial outline that progresses onto an outline business case and eventually onto a full business case? So again, some good conversations around that. So those were the kind of key points that I wanted to draw out for the committee. But of course, I'm happy to take questions on any of the ongoing activities.
Thanks, Andy. Any questions for Andy? No, I think that, I mean, it's really exciting stuff and a huge amount of progress already made, and great news to hear that your Centre of Excellence resource is coming in at the beginning of the year, and I'm sure that will take on even more impetus. Also, and this isn't a surprise, but you're clearly pushing on a very open door, which is fantastic. So no, brilliant. Thank you very much for all the work you're doing on this. It's really good to hear.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on then to item 10 on the agenda, the risk portfolio office risk log tracker. Gillian.
I've nothing really to add to the report, and there's nothing really to pull out. So it's just if anybody's got any specific questions about the report, I'm happy to either answer it or defer to Andy. And there'll be project managers, exec leads here to answer any specific risks round about projects, should there be any.
Okay. Any specifics? Nope. Committee aligned directorate risks. Paul?
Sorry, Fiona.
Sorry, Brian.
Sorry, when you said any specifics, I wasn't entirely sure what you meant there. So anyway, can I ask a question just on that portfolio risk log? And it's not really a specific, it's more an observation. It felt quite alarming looking at something where we've got 24 risks which are graded at red, and I'm not disputing that they should be. I'm just really curious to understand. It's similar to the question I asked earlier about organisational capacity. You know, that's a lot of risk. It's a lot of mitigating actions. Interested just to understand how that volume of risk management is actually corralled at a practical level. And in the absence, well, not in the absence, that's unfair, but how that management of risk is aligned to, takes account of risk appetite, you know, and we'll come on maybe later down the agenda to look at the strategic risks. But I do feel that, you know, without a kind of clear and agile view of risk appetite, it's very hard to do that effective. So apologies if that's a bit of a rambling question, but I'm happy to try and articulate it a bit more clearly. But could someone attempt to respond to it, please?
No, I think it's a really good question. Who would like to? Ross.
Thanks, Chair. This is the third time I've spoken, but the first time I've introduced myself, so apologies, Chair. I am Ross Haggart, Deputy Chief Officer, so I'll have an attempt at answering from a kind of an overarching process point of view, and I'm sure some colleagues will come to my assistance when they clearly see that I require it. So I think it's a really good point, Brian, and I'll be brutally honest. The Portfolio Office Risk Register requires a wee bit of a shakedown, and I asked SMB colleagues to do that at the last meeting because I think there's probably a lot of risks on here that in truth have been on the risk register for some considerable time, and it needs a good refresh. It won't have escaped your attention that we've actually got two risk registers, and there's a reason for that. One's the Portfolio Office Risk Register or Tracker, and the other is those direct risks that are aligned to be scrutinised by the Change Committee. So what I've asked the team to go and do, and Andy is currently engaging with David Johnson, is to refresh the Portfolio Office Risk Tracker so that it better reflects the new template that we've now got, which you can see for the directorate aligned risks that come to the Change Committee. And in doing so, what I've basically said to them is take this opportunity to have through your project and programme boards, to have a really good look at risk for the individual areas. And as we're moving to the new template, make sure that the content is up-to-date and contemporary content to go with the new template. So I've asked for that to come back to SMB in its updated format in, I think off the top of my head, it's January, which will tie in with the next cycle of the Change Committee meeting in February. So the content should become much more up to date. So in truth, I'm not convinced that we're managing 24 risks at that level. I think there's a wee bit of legacy stuff on there. However, I suppose the one comfort that I've got in terms of if it is that level of numbers of risks we're managing is it's across a number of different programmes and projects, each of which have their own governance arrangements in place, and nobody's coming forward at SMB meetings certainly to, although there are some risks that are quite high, there's nobody coming forward screaming that we're required to take any great interventions in relation to those. And in terms of risk appetite, yeah, it's probably, I don't think it's something that we've ever managed particularly brilliant, if I'm honest, Brian, in terms of that current assessment of risk versus our risk appetite, and it's probably something that we need to develop at a strategic level, which will then filter through all of the individual risk registers. So hopefully that helps, and I'm sure colleagues will pick up anything that I've missed.
Andy, thanks, Ross.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, maybe I'm just going to come and repeat a bit of what the DEP said, but again, for yourself, Brian, and the rest of the committee, just to try and provide some reassurance. I think all of the knowledge areas and the core capabilities around the change portfolio, there's not one that I don't believe that I haven't touched on. Risk just being another one of those. And I think one of the things that I've identified, and you allude to it, Brian, through your question, is there's the management of risk and then there's the tracking of risk. So how effectively are we actually managing the risk versus putting it on a tracker in a tool and giving the illusion that we are managing risk, right? So again, it's just another element, as the DEP has spoke about, that I'm working with David Johnson on, around how we move that forward, and you know, not to use it as a bit of a crutch, but you know, once this resource comes into play in January, it will help just move some of this forward a little bit quicker than what we would like today.
Thanks, Andy. Stuart?
Thanks, Fiona. Excuse me, I'd be quite interested to see the risk appetite statement as it relates to change, if someone could circulate it.
Brian?
Can I? Yeah, thanks. I'm sure you would, Stuart, and I think we all would. But as Ross said, this is definitely work in progress, and yeah. I would like to offer a kind of word of qualification around about risk appetite, is that organisations across the piece struggle with it. Struggle to make sense of it, struggle to apply it in a practical sense. And I have, and you know this, expressed some frustration at the lack of progress round about risk appetite. You know, but that's not, I'm not being critical. I'd just like to see things moving along a little bit more speedily. But what I'm greatly encouraged with is the openness in these responses, both from Ross and from Andy. There's no shying away from the issues, and I think as a committee, that's powerful assurance that we're getting. So I'm greatly kind of encouraged with that, and I look forward to seeing the next iteration in the February meeting, and happy if you know I can make any sort of contribution offline towards that, then please call upon me.
Thanks, Brian. Can I just basically repeat what Brian just said in terms of, you know, the openness in terms of the, you know, the illusion by tracking something versus the actual management of the, I mean, it's really good to have that kind of conversation. So really appreciate that. Thank you. Risk appetite, I completely agree. It feels to me like something that for the February meeting, we need to get in about a bit more. So we'll stick that on the agenda for February to see if we can explore it and further develop our understanding of what it means in the context of this committee in particular. And Paul?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and that's an excellent link there, Paul Stewart. Sorry, I'm another guilty party of not stating who I am and what my role is within the organisation. So Paul Stewart, Director of Service Development. Just linking in there in the context of the committee, Fiona, because I think we've had previous discussions, or you as the entire board have had previous discussions around risk appetite. And I sense that when we are talking around particularly elements like the service delivery model programme and the big organisational change projects, that the risk appetite sits wider than the committee. That's just my view on it. It's just pointing that out, that, you know, the risk appetite may well sit at board level for certain projects, but less so for other projects, which may well sit more directly in this committee, because that statement of risk appetite is something that has not yet been fully developed, I would suggest.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Angelina?
Thank you. And yet another guilty party. So addressing my earlier omission, Angelina Foster, board member. Very helpful to hear from the Deputy Chief about the intention to give this a bit of a shakedown or shakeout, I think, to use your language, Ross. And my request would be that when we do that, it seems to me that the concepts of concurrent risk or indeed cumulative risk are potentially very relevant, both to the nature of the service, but also when I reflect on some of the semi-standalone risks in terms of how they're described here. So my ask would be, could we perhaps reflect on whether you could narrate something around the dimensions of, you know, concurrent or cumulative risk, just to let us understand certain scenarios and how they might affect individual risk ratings.
Ross?
Yeah, it was just, you probably saw me nodding furiously there, Angelina, so thanks for that. I think that's a really important point, and I've said this before, and I think we're making vast improvement in this arena, but we still don't really have a portfolio. We've got a collection of programmes and projects, and I think that manifests itself through quite a number of things, risk being one of them. We spoke earlier about resourcing. So there's a risk that cuts across a number of areas that's absolutely going to be concurrent across a number of areas. So it's definitely something that we need to give some attention to, but not just from a risk perspective, right across everything that we're doing here. We need to make sure we take a portfolio-wide perspective to things, as opposed to what we have been guilty of in the past, which is focusing on individual programmes and projects. So it's a great point, and definitely something we'll seek to develop.
Yeah, thanks. The next item's the committee aligned directorate risks. Paul, have you got anything specific you want to flag under that? And then we will probably continue some of what we've just been discussing in terms of the committee's role. But for the moment, committee aligned directorate risks.
Yeah, nothing new, Chair, other than what's in the report. I've got a little bit more to say at the verbal update around the spotlight risk element, some of which we've already touched on today in terms of resources, etc. But I don't have anything specific to add to the report, and it's submitted for any further discussion or scrutiny by the board.
Okay. Any questions for Paul? We're happy to move on. Okay, so the next one, 10.3, general discussion, committee's role and influence on risk. This came about from a question that Stuart, you asked. Would you mind just repeating what it was you asked for the committee, and then myself and Brian will come in on the back of that.
Goodness, I hope I can remember properly. I think the question arose from which one of these should we pick for a spotlight, with any suggestions. And clearly I was coming to this fresh, and I didn't actually understand the question, as I couldn't see how the change committee actually impacts many of these risks at all, let alone which one would I pick as a spotlight. I think it was as simple as that. So either I was getting entirely the wrong end of the stick, or we were at something that was really quite macro level, and I suppose I would challenge then the purpose and the efficacy of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, when, sorry, bit of echo. When you asked the question, I actually stopped and thought, very good question. So on that note, I'm going to ask Brian to say a few words in terms of expanding what influence we actually have and what value we can add as a committee.
Thanks, Fiona. Yeah, I didn't mind the first part of your question. It was the adding value bit that I'm going to struggle with probably. But yeah, I mean, it's what we have tried to do, Stuart, I guess, across the committees is to introduce some level of consistency with the audit committee, you know, kind of holding the ring round about the overall system of risk management and assessing its effectiveness, and individual committees kind of for their areas of remit, you know, seeing the risks, drilling into the risks, and that's the spotlighting process is how that's typically done, because it's a sample, if you like. It's a dipstick test. It's to say, well, for this particular risk, let's talk a little bit more. And I think there are some things which are particularly important there. One is to establish that there is a kind of shared understanding and narrative round about that risk, because quite often it might sound simple, but it doesn't always exist. And two, just hear a little bit more about how the organisation understands what needs to be managed and what it's doing and what progress it's making towards that. And based on that sample, take assurance that if that were replicated across the breadth of risks, then we can take comfort from that process. I mean, more generally, and maybe this is just a personal kind of perspective of mine, and reflects my background perhaps, but I think we all collectively maybe need to focus a little bit more on risks. We have a lot of time talking about, you know, the description of activity, and sometimes maybe at the expense of not having enough discussion around about the risks to delivery. And so from a committee's perspective, I mean, and I think as a committee, we do that up to a point. I think we could probably do more of it, but it's a wee bit more targeting, a wee bit more focus around that. And it's not to catch the executive out, it's actually to support the executive and being able to bring our perspective as non-exec directors to that. Believe it or not, I have seen examples where that can add some value, so it can happen. So that's, I won't go any further, Stuart, but if you feel that there's more to be said, happy to try and fill in the gaps.
No, beautifully answered, Brian, thank you. Stuart, reflections, any further follow-up?
Yeah, I think, you know, what Brian's saying about testing the input from various people into the overall service risks makes perfect sense. And if that's what we're doing, and we end up picking one, and you get to the end of the conversation that says, well, we don't input into this at all, then fine. Okay with that.
Yep.
But that must be a natural conclusion to some of the committees that review some of these risks.
Yep. No, that's helpful. Thank you. That moves us on then to the risk spotlight, strategic risk 8, and Paul, you're going to talk us through where we're at.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Strategic risk 8. So I've taken some notes here, and I've sought to verbalise some of the areas and the key areas within this particular risk that are associated to the Change Committee. So for clarity, strategic risk 8 is the ability to anticipate and adapt to changing environment through innovation and improved performance. So that's the current strategic risk at 8. There are 4/5 areas within the aligned register that talks about the resources and capacity, improved performance, and communication with stakeholders. So I'll just run through each of them and give a little overview of what is within them and where the direction of travel is as we currently understand it across not only the Service Development Directorate, but also the other cross-directorate functions that are inputting in terms of mitigating and managing that risk. So resources and capacity comes up a couple of times, and you know that has been discussed already today. You know, Andy's given input around the Centre of Excellence Manager coming in. We also have some various other resources coming in and advertised around the consultation piece, which touches on the communication with stakeholders, etc. So there are a number of areas where we are seeing and taking proactive action to seek to get the resources into the organisation that are required in order to manage some of this activity. That's not to say that has been plain sailing. You know, Andy's post, the post within Andy, had to go out a couple of times with some challenges around, you know, timescales for releasing staff, etc. And it's been the same with the communications and consultation posts. You know, we've had to go out twice with that. So that inherently, or that has brought in some delays in terms of aiding our resources.
There's also a wider piece of work around the capacity piece, and Andy has already touched on that again today, in understanding the capacity across the organisation to deliver change. And we are taking, and Andy's taking some action within the portfolio office in order to understand that and understand the process of establishing capacity requirements prior to instigating major projects for change. When we look at the improved performance, etc., some of that is linked to consultation processes and the organisational strategy. If I'm being really quite candid around that, the organisational strategy on change activity again links back to some of the elements that Andy has said. But you know, that what is the organisational strategy? We know as the executive members and you know as board members that the change strategy at strategic level, i.e. shape, size of service, etc., you know, all of the different things that are running through the service delivery model programme, that change strategy will come and continue to evolve along that strategic timeline. So that covers some of the performance elements and the strategy. Back to resources and capacity, business case development has already been discussed today, and what that looks like, and with the fact that, you know, we are bringing the business case into a review period and that work is ongoing, also looks at the improvements we can make in terms of the business case process. So I don't really have much more to say. I think the two key risks that are associated with the committee that feed into the strategic risk revolve around the resources and capacity and the communication piece. I think they are the two areas that are key within the sphere of the work within the committee, and I've tried to just give an overview of that, to be honest, Chair, and more than happy to open it up. There are others on the call, Andy, and the depth that may well have more to say on that, but that's really a starting point for any discussion that you may wish to extend out today, Chair.
No, that's great, Paul, and really nice the way some of the stuff we've already discussed has sort of dovetailed into that. Ross.
Thanks, Chair, and just taking up Paul's invite to comment. One area in particular that I would like to comment on, because it's very topical. We spoke earlier about some of the cost challenges, particularly within the construction industry. Committee members will be aware that there are some real challenges across all organisations in terms of recruitment and retention, just because of the labour market at the moment, and that is something that is absolutely impacting upon us as an organisation. And while we've got some levers that we can utilise, clearly as a public sector organisation, those are maybe limited to compared to some other organisations. So Paul's illustrated a couple of examples in terms of the PIC team and also the Change Centre of Excellence manager, but across other areas of the organisation that's proven to be quite challenging as well, and clearly the solution to that is not really within our hands. So just to make you aware of it, we're doing all that we're alive to the issue, we're doing all we can to manage the issue, albeit the levers that we have at our disposal are somewhat limited. And what I'm starting to emphasise to certainly heads of function, we've spoken about it at SLT, is that there's very little we can do at the moment about our available capacity, and while we will continue to try and recruit into key posts, capacity is finite, so we just need to make sure that we prioritise the utilisation of that capacity that we've got. So it was just to underscore that. I know you're all aware of it, and you'll be hearing about it probably through other committees, particularly the People Committee, but it will impact upon our change initiatives as we go forward. So that was all I wanted to add. Thanks.
No, that's absolutely, Ross, and it just in my mind feeds right back into the business change life cycle and how we enable ourselves to prioritise appropriately with the resource that we've got in hand, which I know is very obvious, but yeah, that's becoming even more important given the labour market, etc. And I'm assuming we're not as competitive as we might be. I would imagine private sector has deeper pockets for some of these, like project management roles. I've certainly had anecdotally that there's some very silly money being paid. So I fully appreciate it's a very difficult market at the moment. Does anyone get any further questions for Paul or Ross? Brian?
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you. And Paul, I really like the way that was linked back to the strategic objective. Of course, the danger in doing that is you invite me to ask a question about that strategic risk. But trust me, it's not a trick question. I really genuinely, I can understand why your focus was on capacity, but one element of that strategic risk is responding through innovation. And I wondered whether you had a view on whether, you know, the response, particularly around about the change agenda, was sufficiently innovative to respond to that part of that strategic risk. Sorry if that's a hard question, I apologise.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And it is a fairly difficult question at this particular stage of maturity around the innovation side of things. I think one of the phrases that that Andy uses fairly regular, which clearly is now my own, is the stage of maturity and what our maturity assessment is around innovation. And I think the short answer, Brian, is that is a work in progress around the innovation. And I think that we need to be in a position to identify areas of innovation and then collate and report and record as appropriate as we move forward. So apologies, Brian, if that doesn't fully answer your question, but it's just an honest assessment of where we are in terms of our maturity within the organisation at this stage in time.
No, I don't think you need to apologise, Paul. I think risk management is an iterative process, and actually what it seems to suggest to me is perhaps more explicitly pulling out where there is innovation occurring, because I'm pretty sure it is occurring, but it might be in order to improve that alignment back to the strategic level risk. It's just maybe a thought. You know, is there a better way to do that so as to tease that out a little bit more? Thank you.
I think there, just before I bring Andy in, there's a bigger organisational question around innovation for me, and we've talked about this before. You know, are we really focusing on innovation as much as we could do? And examples like Paul mentioned, you know, talking to other organisations, doing a bit of benchmarking. The West Midlands, whilst you might not call that hugely innovative, it is in terms of it's bringing in good practice and proven ideas into our organisation. So I guess for me, there's a bigger piece around, do we really look at innovation as much as we can do at an organisational level? Andy?
Thanks, Chair. So just again, in the interests of transparency for the committee in terms of some of the conversations around that, Brian, one of the concepts that many of you might already be familiar with is this thought of business architecture, and how we can leverage business architecture to help drive what that innovation internally within the organisation needs to be, and how that then links back to what the strategic objectives and priorities are. So when I talk about the business architecture piece, and if I try and oversimplify it, it's just having that 10,000-foot view of the core capabilities and services that we provide as an organisation, first and foremost, that allows us to visually, as an executive, start to drill into some of these capabilities and services to say, we need to innovate in here. And instead of what maybe we're guilty of at the moment is trying to boil the ocean, because there is a lot of change activity going on across the organisation. But it's how we start to pull all of that together and start to coordinate and orchestrate it, right? Because not everything's a major project.
I think Andy's just frozen. Everybody else okay? Yeah, Nick's waving.
Yeah.
Sorry, Andy, we've lost you. He's still frozen. We'll get him back shortly when his technology works. But yeah, I think that business architecture piece, I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more about as we go through the portfolio office progress. Good. Okay. Thank you for the risk section. That takes us on to agenda item 11. Sorry, Angelina, you want in?
Thank you. Just very briefly, and if I can manage expectations, I don't think my question is going to offer much in the way of value add, so apologies for that. It is yet again on my part. I'm seeking to increase my confidence in my correct interpretation of this information. So that's the context for this. But it's the first of the more detailed risks under number 8. So it's back to resources and capacity. But here's the bit that slightly challenged me. Target rating 5, current risk rating 16. So one of our larger gaps between target and current. Despite that, a green status at 60%. And then the target date end of March next year. So do I read the combination of that to be telling me that our confidence levels organisationally, notwithstanding earlier comments about the marketplace and so forth, but does that mean we're absolutely green in our expectation that March will see us fully resourced? Or is that me being overly optimistic on your behalf? Do you see my question? It's a what is this really telling me question, I think.
Yeah. Who would like to?
Yeah.
Ross.
I was going to answer, but Ross can come in.
You can come in to correct me, Paul. I think you raised this at the last meeting, Angelina, and there was without going back to the action log, I think there was an action taken for Richard Whetton to maybe provide some underpinning information. My understanding of that is that when where you've got the risk, the control comments, and there's actions being undertaken to try and address that risk. I think that means that it's green in terms of those actions are on track in terms of how they were milestoned to complete those actions, and the 60% suggests there's 60% of those actions complete. I'm not sure of the direct linkage between those actions being complete and then a change to the risk rating, but you would like to think that once those actions are complete, if they've been assessed as appropriate actions to take to mitigate that risk, it would have a positive impact upon the risk rating. But it's maybe worth just, and without going back to the action law, Chair, it's maybe just worth making sure that that action has been fully rounded off from the last meeting. And if I've given a different answer to the last meeting, Angelina, apologies for that.
We'll double check that. Does that answer your question, Angelina?
I think so. I probably need to just let it mill about in my head a bit, but thank you very much meantime. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry. Right, committee rolling forward planning, forward plans attached. We have identified one addition for the February meeting, which is to get in about risk appetite a bit more. Is there anything else anybody has spotted in terms of the forward plan? Nope. Good, thank you. 11.2 items for consideration at future IGF board and strategy day meetings. Risk appetite sort of feels like one that we might want to touch. Yeah, I can see some nodding. So any other ones for future IGF board and strategy day? No? Okay, thank you. Agenda item 12, review of actions. Ali, while I remember, we do need to check back in relation to that last conversation in terms of Angelina potentially raising this at a previous meeting, etc. So get an action on that. We've obviously got the risk appetite action for forward plan and IGF. Any other actions from today?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, taking a note of that. Just with regard to item 8.1 on the agenda, the Portfolio Office Project Dashboard, just an update in relation to the wording and intended meaning within section 0.4.1 and whether you want to detail that as an action.
Yeah, yep.
And that's against the Programme Office. And update just for the next meeting, but obviously to be actioned as soon as possible.
Yep. Okay. Ross?
Thanks, Chair. It was just if I look back at the action log, I'm wondering if this was an action that was raised from a very similar question on the risk register that came forward to the Service Delivery Committee, as opposed to this committee. So when Ali's looking back the action log, it might have been raised by Angelina at the Service Delivery Committee.
Okay, that's good because I didn't remember it being raised, but I thought that was just my brain.
And I'm afraid nor can I, so your memory is better than mine, Ross. I'm afraid I can't shed any light on it, despite possibly being the originator. Sorry.
Okay, that's us done on the action log. Date of the next meeting is Thursday, 3rd of February. Just to mention that we will have a verbal update from Ian Morris on MacDonald Road in the private session due to some contract confidentiality elements. Thank you all. That ends the public meeting.